Hi, and welcome back to PSD Tuts. This is the scene as we left it at the end of the previous tutorial. The wine bottle and the wine glass were both revolved in Photoshop directly from pen-drawn paths, and they were then placed on a table that was revolved from an object drawn with the brush tool. What we're going to do now is see how we can apply texture and transparency to these objects, as well as putting in the new background to really bring this scene to life. So let's start off with the table. When we click on it, we can see the properties panel shows the default position, showing the mesh. If we click again, we can now see the materials. And if we wanted to, we could access that in a different way by going to the 3D panel and choosing the third tab, and that shows all the materials used in this scene. At the moment, there's a plain grey featureless material applied, and we can change that by clicking on it, and we see a pop-up list of all the available materials. It's just off your screen, so let's drag the properties panel out here so we can see it more clearly. Once again, we click on it, and we can see this scrolling list of the built-in default materials. We could apply this red texture. We could apply this checkerboard texture. What I rather like, though, is this rather interesting one, which is full of holes. And you can see that although it's a texture applied to the table, it actually affects the opacity of the table at the same time. Let's have a go with this rather neat checkerboard effect, and as you can see, the pattern radiates out from the center of the table. And that's all there is to it. We pick the texture we want, and we can then set the reflectiveness of this table, so we can make it a little bit shiny. We can set the amount of which it would refract light seen through it, that's if we took the opacity down, and so on. Now when we look at it in the working view, it looks very rough, and that's because we need to render it in order to see how it works. We can go to the 3D menu and choose Render. And what this does is it passes through the document in chunks, and on each pass it takes a little bit longer, and it refines the render that much more. And one reason for doing this is that it means you can quite quickly see if your render is working. So we can see already that we're getting quite a smooth look to our table, and we're also getting a little bit of reflection in the table from the bottle and the glass. That's because we set the reflection amount up here. If we think, well, we want a bit more reflection than that, we can stop the render at any point simply by clicking in it. And now let's increase the reflection amount and start to render it again. Now, we don't want to render the whole image. Instead, we can select just the bottom part of it that we're interested in here and try rendering that. And now it'll only render that selection. And you can see with the increased reflections, we can see the reflections more clearly of the glass and the bottle. And that's the effect we want on this table. So once again, we can stop this, deselect, and when we deselect, you can see clearly the difference between the rendered area here and the unrendered area. In particular, the shadows are quite smooth where it's rendered and very rough where it's not rendered. Now let's have a look at the glass. So we'll select the glass layer in the 3D panel, and when we click on it, we now get our properties panel coming up again. We want the glass to look like glass, but when we look at our list of textures, glass doesn't figure among them. Well, we can always load some more textures by going to the gear icon and choosing glass. And it will say to us, do you want to replace the current materials? No, we want to append them, so we'll add them at the end. And there are our two glass textures at the end. Let's select this one. And you can see our glass virtually disappears. Let's make a selection of this area and try a test render and see how it looks. And as it passes through, you can see not only is it giving that glass all the shininess that's inherent in the description of this texture, it's also very neatly refracting the view seen through it. So we can see the refraction of the table here and of the edge of the bottle. And at the bottom here, we can see a refracted view of the side of this bottle. So that's all looking very good. Let's now stop this render just by clicking. And let's have a look at the bottle itself. So we can select the bottle in our 3D panel. And now let's move our properties panel out of the way. We don't need that anymore. Now, we're going to treat this bottle slightly differently because we want to apply a label to it. And to do that, we can look in the Layers panel and we can see our bottle extrusion material. And this is the default texture that's wrapped around it. Let's double-click to open it. And as you can see, it opens in a new window. Well, there's nothing in there at the moment. That's because we haven't applied any texture. So let's fill this, first of all, with a color. We'll go to our Swatches panel, choose a nice deep green, and press Option-Delete or Alt-Delete to fill with that color. When we now save, it's going to apply that color to the bottle. And there you see that our nice deep bottle green color. The next step is I want to put a cap on this bottle. So we have a red foil top to it. So we can choose some red. Now the question is, we don't know where to put this cap. So what I'm going to do is to make a new layer. Because this material is effectively a separate Photoshop document, we can have several layers within it, and that makes it much easier to work with. So let's make a layer the full width of our texture, call it cap, and fill it with that color. And now let's save and see what happens. Well, rather surprisingly, nothing is showing up on our bottle. Let's go onto our bottle layer and see what happens here. If we select the bottle, we can spin it around, and as we turn it, we can see, right, there it is. Why is it going down the back there rather than very neatly across the top? And the reason for that is that when Photoshop makes a texture that it applies to an object, it doesn't always do it in a predictable way. But because we can edit the texture while we're looking at the object, it's quite easy to figure out how to make this work. Let's move it down and use Free Transform to rotate it 90 degrees. So where do we put this? Let's try it all the way over on the right-hand side. And we'll save. Okay, let's put it at the bottom. Let's drag it back and save. That's getting better. Back a little further and save. And that's good. So that is the position for our cap on the top of the bottle. Now, you must understand, of course, this looks a bit weird because how on earth can this top be right in the middle of our pattern? Well, it's because the material is deformed to fit around the bottle, and that's simply the way that Photoshop handles it. Let's now see if we can apply a label to this. So we'll make another new layer and call it Label. And we'll make a rectangular selection. That's the shape we want our label to be. And let's choose a nice off-white color and fill this. And so we know we're getting it the right way up. Let's put some text on this label. And we can write on here, vin de table. And down the bottom we can write house red. And just to make it look a little bit more like a real wine label, let's add some grapes. We'll make a new layer, call it grapes, and make an elliptical selection. And let's fill this with red and use the dodge and burn tools to add a little bit of dark shading and a little bit of light up there. And now we can go to the move tool and simply take a load of copies of this grape and position them all around on our label. And we get a reasonably convincing view of a bunch of grapes. I just want to make the Van der Table a little bit bigger and increase the leading on there slightly. So there is our label, and the trouble is, as we know, if we save the document now, we're going to get the label in completely the wrong place. Rather than selecting all the label elements and distorting them as separate layers, let's select them and turn them into a smart object. What that means is we can take this smart object and distort it. Let's bring it down to size, and I think we're going to need to rotate it and see how that fits. We'll save again. I think it's in the right place, but I think it's just gone around the back of our bottle. So let's go onto our bottle and turn this round. There it is. Okay, that's good. It's too tall, obviously, so we can go back into our texture layer and distort this smart object. So we'll make it a lot smaller. And save. And that's not bad. We can go very slightly bigger on the whole thing, but we'll keep the proportions the same. And that's quite a good looking label. Now, even though we distorted it and rotated it, we can still change the text in this label if we want to. If we double click it, it opens the smart object with all of those layers intact. And now we could change this to say anything we want. And when we save this, it saves the smart object back into our label. And when we save this, it saves the whole material back onto our bottle. So there is the bottle now with the label in place. We want to make the bottle itself transparent so we can see through it, at least to the table behind it. We don't want to apply a glass texture to it. What we can do instead is select it and have a look at our properties panel. And here you can see is the texture we've chosen. Well, the obvious thing to do might seem to be, let's reduce the opacity, and let's take it down to about 80%. What's happening, though, is that the whole bottle is going transparent, the label along with the glass. And that's clearly no good. We want to be able to see through the glass part, but we don't want to be able to see through the label. Well, we can fix that, because rather than lowering the opacity for the whole thing, we can click on the pop-up menu by the opacity slider, and we can choose New Texture. And it's going to ask us for a size for this texture. Let's put this away for a moment and think about what size we want. Well, it seems fairly obvious to me we want the size to be the same as the texture we defined for the whole bottle, because that'll make it easy to work with. So let's have a look at that again. We can select the whole document and go to the Edit menu and make a merged copy, and that copies the entire document as if it were a single layer. Now, when we make our new opacity texture, it comes up to the size of the clipboard, 1024 by 1024 pixels, which is the default size for Photoshop textures. Now here's the way that this works. Let's edit this texture. And there it is. When you're working with opacity maps, anywhere that's black becomes transparent. So if I just paint black through here, and now save this, you can see that transparent piece going through the middle of the bottle. What that means is if we paste in the label that we made, what we want to do is to make all the green areas partially transparent and everything else wants to be opaque. Let's use the magic wand tool. We can click in this green area to select it, hold the Shift key and click in this one. We don't want it purely transparent, we want it slightly transparent. So in our swatches we can go for a fairly bright grey colour. And let's fill with that colour. We want everything else to be white, in other words purely opaque, so let's inverse this selection and fill that with white. When we now save this, there is our bottle, and you can see the transparency showing through in the green areas where the cap and the label are still completely opaque. Now we've done that, let's put away our opacity mask and let's try a test render of the whole scene. And it'll work its way through it slowly. As it can take quite a long time to do a full render, let's skip ahead a few minutes and we can see how the image looks after the render has taken place. The glass has rather neatly refracted the view through it with the wine label and the table behind it. We're getting nice reflections in here. A couple of things I'd like to change. I would like to see a bit more transparency and a bit more shine on the bottle itself. And I don't like this harsh line down the middle of the glass, and I think that is because the join between the 360-degree start and finish happens to go right down the middle, and I think that's what's causing it. So let's fix those things. We'll select the glass and rotate it and see if we can get rid of that join. And there that goes. We can tuck that behind the back. And that will look better. Let's take our bottle, have a look in our textures here, and increase the shine on that and increase the reflection on the bottle itself. That's going to make it look better. And once again, let's apply another test render just to the top of this part. And that's looking better. I think we're going to get a better looking glass this way. The question now is, what do we do about a background? I have a background ready here. Let's put it in place and let's make another selection up here and try that render again. Well, what's happening is not quite what we want to happen. The glass is refracting the view of the table and of the bottle, but it's not making any difference to the background. And the reason for that is it can't work with that background image unless that image is part of the 3D scene. So let's stop this. To do that, we need to select our background picture, and let's just make a copy of it so we can keep the original in case we need it. On our 3D panel, let's make this into a 3D postcard. And there it is. It doesn't look any different, but it is now a 3D object. Let's now move this postcard above our bottle layer and merge the two layers together. And you can see that the postcard has come out intersecting with the table? Well, let's go into our 3D panel, find that postcard layer. There it is. And we can now select it, send it back so it's actually a long way behind that table, and now make it bigger. And there it is back in our scene. Let's make a selection of the top of this glass again, try a render and see what happens. That's better. Already, even this short distance into the render, we can see that the glass is properly refracting the view seen through it. So let's now complete our scene. I want to make the bottle a little more transparent, so let's select it, go into the Properties panel and look at the materials, and let's open up that opacity map again. Now you remember that the white area is opaque and black is fully transparent. We have a light grey here, which is making it partially transparent. Let's use the curves dialog to darken up these mid-tones. And when we save now, we can see that the bottle has become much more transparent. And let's now do a final render of this whole scene. Once again, it can take quite a long time. We're talking minutes, even hours, to do a full render. So we'll skip ahead a little while in time, and here is our finished scene. And you can see the increased transparency on the bottle, the refraction through the glass, but also the reflection of this background in the table, the reflection of the glass in the bottle in the table, the shadows, the shadow of the glass cast onto the bottle, even the reflection of the glass in the bottom of the bottle here. And remember, everything in this scene, apart from the photographic background, was created not in a complex 3D program, but directly in Photoshop. In a future tutorial, we'll look at some more advanced techniques, such as softening the shadows and using image-based lighting to make a much more realistic appearance.